Hello there and thanks for joining us in Project Justice. I am Utaba Moran. The Nigerian Bar Association (NBA) has since its incorporation been engaged in the promotion of the rule of law, good governance and democracy. Lawyers played a pivotal role during the various phases of Nigeria's military dictatorship. As a body, bar leaders spoke truth to power, supported civil rights and pro-democracy movement, promoted human rights and freedom of the press. While civil rule has long been restored, critics say recent developments in Nigeria bears a strange resemblance to events in the jackboot era, hence the need for leaders to be constantly held accountable. After all, like they say, eternal vigilance is the price of freedom. Various reported cases of human rights abuses abound across the country. Nigerians are being killed by the number without proper investigation by the government. High-profile illegal detentions, judges who are owed salaries 4 months, and a judiciary fast losing its autonomy and independence. It is at times like these that silence is not golden. The Nigerian Bar Association was known for being a key voice for the oppressed, a respected body whose opinions, when the authorities veered off the path of the rule of law, carried weight and made the headlines. Is the NBA living to its self-acclaimed mandate? Current President of the Bar, Abubakar Mahmood, Senior Advocate of Nigeria, is our guest on Project Justice. But that's after this short break. Thank you very much for granting us this time.
Thank you, Moran.
You came in as president of the Nigerian Bar Association at a very difficult time in the Nigerian judiciary, the raid of the judges and the arrest of some judges in the federal courts in the country. How have you been able to handle that challenge and interface with the judiciary and also the relevant government organs?
Thank you very much, Moran. And yes, indeed, it has been a very difficult time. It was something quite unprecedented in the history of this country. The events of a couple of weeks back when the judges were raided and arrests were made and all of that. We definitely have had a lot of issues with that in terms of the approach of the administration. But we also did see that as a big opportunity for us to really accept that there are challenges in the system and to then do our best to see how to overcome these challenges. One of the things we've been trying to point out to the judiciary is that we have to use this opportunity to take measures that will help to rebuild confidence in the nation's judiciary. We have to really appreciate that our main issues is not really in terms of the government as such, but the judiciary exists to serve the Nigerian people, and the people need to have confidence in it. And that has been our approach, that whatever issues there are with the government, we will face that. But let us do our own homework. Let us accept that there are problems, and let us see how we can overcome those problems. And I'm happy to say that the leadership and the judiciary has been very cooperative and has been very understanding. We have come to some agreements on a number of issues on how to proceed. And we are right now looking at a number of initiatives. The new acting Chief Justice has also come up with his own reform programs. And the Bar Association is supporting that, and we also are coming up with our own ideas as to what needs to be done. So yes, the challenges are there, but the opportunities are perhaps even more important.
A lot of people were taken aback a little when the NBA initially declared, a total support for the judges who were affected, but subsequently decided to pull out a bit and say, okay, I think the judges could face the music. Why did he take that position?
I think there was a general misunderstanding of our position. Our position remains the same. It remains consistent. Our focus is on the institution of the judiciary. You can't have military-style operation, raiding judges' houses in the middle of the night and breaking doors and walls on the pretext that you're investigating corruption charges or allegations. And that was our objection, that there must be due process in the whole of these issues. And we don't see any reason why the regular state agencies should not undertake these investigations. A judge is not a terrorist. He does not. There is no indication that these were people who would resist arrest or who would do anything to compromise the investigation. But even if such issues were there, we think that the police could have handled this. So that informed our initial response. And of course, subsequently, the issues came out. And what we were opposed to was when some of the justices started admitting certain conduct in their own statements. Some of them admitted to sustained interaction with politicians, which we felt was unhealthy. And given this sort of atmosphere, you cannot have a judge facing these allegations and him making these statements in the public domain, and then the next day he's sitting in court. So we then advised the NJC that such judges that openly went into those sort of controversies, that in the interest of the institution, that is the judiciary, they need to step aside until these investigations have been cleared. Some people thought we were suggesting that any judge facing any allegations should step aside. No. All the judges who were facing those serious allegations and who then made comments that clearly, in our view, were not consistent with their continued functioning as judges under those circumstances. Those are the ones that we said must step aside and until those allegations are cleared. And we made this position very clearly to the NJC and to our colleagues, and everybody understood that. So there was no inconsistency in our position from the beginning. We've always been focused on protecting the institution of the justice sector and the judiciary.
Some of those cases, those judges have already been charged to court, so we won't dwell much on that for purposes of sub-judice. But do you also anticipate, even in the event some of them are cleared from the charges they're facing in court, for them to go back to sit as judges? And if you anticipate that happening, what level of confidence does the public now have in the institution and even the judicial officer who presides over a case such as that?
Well, if you face an allegation and the court clears you, that's a statement that says, that gives you a clean bill of health. So we don't see any issues with that. Obviously, the wider issues really is what steps the judiciary needs to take to rebuild confidence. It's not going to be on the basis of 1 or 2 or 3 cases. We're looking at the process and the entire system. So some of us feel some of these challenges are systemic. And so the judiciary must come up with a clear program which the legal profession, the Bar Association, will support in terms of dealing with these systemic issues.
Do you see any of such clear programs from the judiciary so far? Of course, the CJN recently issued what appeared to be some kind of reforms that would be implemented in the sector, but we've had some of those things in the past. Is the problem about bringing new reforms or implementing what has been in existence?
I think it's probably both. In the new National Judicial Policy, which was adopted in April 2016, this issue, especially of corruption in the system, was clearly recognized as a major challenge. And the policy itself describes the problem as systemic. So what it means is that it's not a matter of 1 or 2 individuals, but it's a matter of the processes and some of the institutional issues involved. And in the policy itself, it's recommended that an audit of the system should be undertaken. And this audit will involve not just processes from the entire, cutting across the entire justice sector, but also personal audit. So what it means is we have to find a way of checking to see those who are really not living up to expectations, either in terms of professional competence or in terms of ethical issues. And then we have to find a way of dealing with those. So right now, a small technical committee is working at the modalities. And the Bar Association is also we put up a very strong team headed by one of our past presidents, Mr. Olisa Bakoba. And they're looking at the details of what the Bar Association needs to do to support these entire initiatives. But yes, we've seen the new initiatives of the current acting CJN, and our views that some of these things need to be scaled up. And we hope that he will understand that, and we will be there to support that. And certainly, we think that a lot needs to be done, to rebuild this confidence, and we are confident that this will be done.
I looked through some of those proposed reforms, and one of it is that judges, especially lower court judges, after delivering judgment, it must be sent to, I think, the NJC, a committee in the NJC, to take a look at what has been done. I wonder what that does to discretion when we already have a system where a judgment delivered in a lower court can be appealed upon through the judicial process. So if you bring in an administrative mechanism to put in place, what does that do in terms of how does that affect the constitutional channel of a judgment going up the ladder and appeal?
Well, I don't want to go into the details because I don't want to preempt anything. But clearly, one of the things that we have been emphasizing is that there are lots of governance issues within the judiciary itself. You see, the judiciary is an institution, but it's also being governed, through other sort of organs like the National Judicial Council and all of that. And what we've been suggesting to the NJC is that we need to really step back, evaluate the system, and incorporate some of the more modern good practices, best practices in terms of corporate governance, in terms of human resource issues, and in terms of finance and all of that, and really upgrade the institution. It's not easy for an ordinary person to come forward and lodge a complaint against a senior officer of government or even a judge who has enormous powers. So that means the judiciary must itself have its own internal mechanisms of evaluating performance, evaluating conduct, and evaluating ethical issues, irrespective of what the members of the public are doing.
All right, still talking about issues of ethics and dealing with corruption in the judiciary. We've seen the situation that played out recently as well, and still disturbing a lot of Nigerians as well. I don't know what the NJC is reading to the non-appointment of a Chief Justice of Nigeria in substantive capacity over 2 months after the National Judicial Council had sent a recommendation to the President.
Well, obviously, this delay is uncalled for, is unnecessary. The head of the judiciary is a very important person, and obviously the judiciary is a very important organ of the government. So there's absolutely no reason why there should be delay in this sort of appointments. And normally, in most well-established climes, the successor is, the issues around the succession are well cleared long ahead of the end of the tenure of the current person. So yes, the NJC has sat, and we were part of the process, and the recommendation has been sent to the President. The President is obviously the appointing authority, and he needs to act on that recommendation, either to pass it on, appoint and pass it on for confirmation to the Senate, or if there are any issues, he needs to then inform the NJC. But we cannot afford an atmosphere of uncertainty or of indecision or instability in the system. And we have made representation to the Attorney General on this issue that these matters should not be delayed any further. And we're making efforts again to meet with the President and to emphasize that this sort of decisions need to be taken quickly.
The President has made statements about the judiciary in the past where observers found it not to be very complimentary. He said on occasions that the judiciary is his biggest headache, and that was subject to different interpretations by people who heard that and who read that. and seeing what has happened all down the line, and we're having the president's first opportunity as president of the Federal Republic to appoint a Chief Justice of Nigeria. Very critical appointment. We've heard people talk about looking for credible Nigerians outside the system to appoint to head the judiciary. You think the president is thinking towards that direction? And going by his body language and his statements, is he very comfortable with the justices on the bench of the Supreme Court?
We all know that the president has made public pronouncements, on the judiciary, and we know that he does think that there are issues in the judiciary, and many Nigerians share that view, and we also, of course, believe there are challenges in the system. So, but these are not issues that should affect the process of appointment. If the president wanted to bring in outsiders or whoever, he should have initiated that process. The president is not just a conveyor belt. He's not just a rubber stamp. He has, of course, a role to play, and he is the person who appoints. But that the law, the Constitution, requires him to now seek the confirmation of the Senate. So, but what is important is for the president to act quickly.
A lot of people are also wondering why the NBA is not speaking up very strongly about some of these issues, these concerns which you're just sharing with me. And the judiciary on its own can't speak for itself. So most of the time it's the NBA that speaks to some of the issues and concerns and challenges affecting the judiciary. I don't know how you feel about it, but the sentiment speaking to some lawyers or members of the NBA is that this kind of strong engagement and activist, if I may use that word, approach to dealing with the government and matters affecting the judiciary doesn't really seem to be there at the moment.
I don't think that's a fair statement on the part of the Bar Association. We've been very, very actively engaging with all stakeholders, all the institutions, and all the people. And yes, there are certain things we may need not to come out openly to make them, but we've made our views very, very clearly and very strongly on all of these issues. And the engagement with the stakeholders after the incidents in the judiciary bear testimony to that. We were with the Chief Justice of Nigeria, and we had a very long engagement and discussions. And of course, there are other stakeholders present. So, and we've expressed our views very publicly and very openly. So, I don't think that is a fair statement to make about the Bar Association. If anything, we have been too vocal on many of the national issues affecting the justice sector and affecting the judiciary.
You talked very strongly during your campaigns about the need to ensure a cleansing of not just the bench but also the bar as well, because when people are talking corruption in the judiciary, it doesn't work in isolation, and the members of the bar who serve as conduit or whatever to making that happen. How far have you gone in dealing with the issue of corruption and unethical practices within the bar? I think you're about 6 months now in office.
Well, I started end of August, so that's about 5 months now. Since I came in, and obviously I came in as president of the Bar Association and under very difficult circumstances, but throughout our campaign we did make it clear that one of the major focus of what we are going to be doing is looking at the whole regulation of the legal profession. We've just set up a very powerful committee here on this issue, and it's being chaired by some very senior lawyer, Chief Anthony Digbe, and the committee is a 22-member committee comprising what I will describe as some of the best brains in the legal profession. And their terms of reference are very clear. We're looking to review the entire architecture, the regulatory architecture of the legal profession. The committee will conclude its work by the end of April, and we are already engaging with various stakeholders. So this is one of the major initiatives we are coming up with. And we are seeking support of not only lawyers and stakeholders internally, but our partners across the world to help us, because we know these are global issues. But what we are convinced and clear about is Nigeria at the moment does not have the legal profession it deserves. We do not compare favorably with our peers across the world. And we want to raise our standards.
Let's talk about an issue that has been bothering most Nigerians as well, that has to do with human rights situation in the country. We've seen so many killings across board. The state of insecurity is on the rise. The most recently is the Southern Kaduna crisis. You recently paid a visit to Kaduna State and met with the governor, went to the area of conflict as well. What did you get as your first-hand preliminary observation of what's going on there?
Essentially, the objective of the visit, one is to express our concern, to the government and stakeholders. Two is to really get first-hand information and to help us define and explore what role the NBA can further play in terms of mediating and in terms of trying to get a resolution. What we see is that it's a very complex problem that has spanned over a long period, and so many issues have fed into it. Rhetorics that are very unhelpful from political leaders, from religious leaders and other leaders. So one of our appeals was for these stakeholders and these leaders to really moderate their utterances and help the process of reconciliation and peacemaking. We have had interaction with the governor, and we've also shared some of our tentative conclusions with him, and suggested that a broader approach needed to be designed. It's not just a one-track approach, and this broader approach will include a lot of initiatives. First, bringing the community to the table and having perhaps some neutral people to really act as mediators, whether locally or internationally.
But are you satisfied with what he has done at that level and even the reaction of the federal government to the issue there?
We think that the governor is very concerned, and he appears to be determined to overcome the problems. We think perhaps there's more room for tact and for a better approach to bringing stakeholders around and really to toning down the moderating the tension and all of that. And this is where the governor needs to be supported by well-meaning Nigerians, by well-meaning organizations, and so that there will be some sense of neutrality involved in the process. I think some of the government initiatives seem to be caught up in political crossfire, and people are not willing to look at things objectively because of political tension and interest and all of that. But other factors which we have seen, clearly youth restiveness in some of the communities, and also poverty in those communities. So there needs to be all of these factored into. But again, we interacted with the very ordinary people and their leaders, and the Bar Association is very impressed with what we saw as genuine commitment to finding lasting solution to the problem. We think really those communities need to be assisted.
I don't know what your score will be in terms of rule of law for the government, especially as it has to do with obedience to court orders. It's very key. The NBA stands to protect that and to promote that. What would be your score?
The government and its agencies must always respect court orders. And if there are any reasons or any issues that arise that make the government uncomfortable with any court decision, the system itself has an inbuilt process of appealing those decisions. And so the due process needs to be followed. You either obey the court order immediately as directed by the court, or you challenge it according to constitutional due process, and whatever the outcome of that challenge, you then must respect it. A situation where government agencies or government authorities think that they have a right to select which court orders to obey or not to obey, we think is very unhealthy, and we hope that that will change. I think there are a few high-profile matters now presently which court orders are not being respected. And when we meet with the Attorney General and indeed with the President, this is certainly one issue we will be bringing up to discuss with them and to emphasize the need for the court, the government to respect all of these issues. The government cannot expect ordinary citizens to be obeying orders of authorities if the government itself cannot obey the orders of its own constituted authorities. This is fairly basic, and the Bar Association will certainly be making a very strong case on this, and we hope that that situation will change.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. God bless you.
Well, that's Project Justice for this week. Be sure to follow us on Twitter. The handle is @ProJustice. Also send us your thoughts via email. Our address, projectjusticeonline@gmail.com. You can also view us on YouTube. Just click on the link, Project Justice. I am Utobel Moran, and on behalf of the entire production crew, many thanks for staying with us. See you next week.